And now we're at Terri Palmer's talk. Terri came to Canada with her fiance in 2003 to take a professional position at York University. That job didn't list, but the husband did, and he's here today, I want to mention, as did her love of Toronto. Since leaving York in 2010, Terri has been a professional writer, both as a freelancer and as a full-time technical writer. She also took a master in divinity, graduated in 2020. In her free time, Terri is a Toastmaster, a cat socializer. I like that on Haters. You'll have to explain that. And a video gamer. And her talk today is called Being Child-Free. And she mentions in the opening, no one seriously wants to talk about overpopulation. Many talk of them, people who should stop having children, poor people, handicapped people, people of color, immigrants and refugees, and above all those people outside the developed world. However, we all agree that overpopulation is a problem, especially since everyone wants a Western lifestyle. And as we face a climate crisis, what to do? The world isn't running out of time, out of people, but it is running out of time. And now Terri will speak.
Is this a good? Yeah, that's a good. Okay, just checking. Okay, as I said, as was mentioned, I will be talking about something near and dear to my heart, which is being what's called child-free, which is what it sounds like. It's having no children. Now, when I've heard the term, it implies that this is a conscious decision, not one because of fertility or circumstance. And it does allow adopting or fostering children. It just means that you choose to personally have no children, to personally bear no children into the world. Now, most people can appreciate that not everyone wants children, that some people who want children can't support them financially or emotionally, that some physically can't have them because it's unsafe, if you've got certain physical problems. And some people don't have children because they might pass on a medical condition such as Huntington's, which is a terrible disease. And if you have it, you have a 1 in 2 chance of passing it on to your children, unless, it's not great. So some younger people also don't plan on having children because they fear climate change will make the world an unsustainable place for children. So, and that's understandable, even if some people think it's alarmist. So these are personal and private choices, but still not everyone respects them. A lot of people seemingly love it when other people have children. People without children will get used to being asked, oh, well, why not? Or, oh, you will, in a tone of clear surprise, apparently because everyone likes children, or is supposed to at least. Even today, younger women report going to the doctor and asking for a hysterectomy or tubal ligation, and sometimes they have very good medical reasons. They've got problems that make it physically painful just to have a normal monthly cycle, much less have children. And they're told no, because they might want children later. Or their future husband might want children later. Or even today, if they want to get a hysterectomy or what have you, they should get their husband's signature to do so, because people should have children. And of course, there are religious people, notably in the United States, but all over the world, who don't want women to even have contraception, much less abortions, because having children is just something people should do if they're of sound mind. And if they don't, they're not just weird, they might actually be selfish. They're not contributing to the survival of the human race. Who will help you when you're old? So there's some pressure to have children, even when it's a terrible idea. And one time I took a class on eco-Christianity through one of the Catholic colleges at University of Toronto. And they had a speaker in about the watershed. in near Toronto, a bit east. And somebody asked him, well, what would most help the watershed? And he said, well, about half the population. Haha. It was stony silence. It was hilarious to me. Maybe not to him, but it was hilarious to me. So no, traditionally we know that people had a lot of children because there was no contraception or abortion, or at least not very much. There was some. People did legitimately need someone to take care of them in their old age when there was no safety net. Many children died in utero or at birth or in early childhood. So you had a lot of kids because a lot of them would die. And religious figures exhorted people to be fruitful and multiply, in part out of devotion to God, and in part because you need people to be your army. So you need a larger population for that. So it wouldn't be surprising for you to hear that the clear majority of North Americans who were surveyed said yes if they wanted children. That was then. Now it's just over 50%, with younger people likely to fall well below 50%. Because they don't want to have kids, or they can't have kids. So that doesn't necessarily measure the number of people who would like to have children if things were equal, but they decide that they can't for whatever reason. So why do people do this? Is it always out of need or hardship? It's not necessarily. For a lot of people, or a growing number of people, I believe, being child-free is a moral act. And that's because it's the simplest and most efficient way to preserve the environment. Now, I'll get to that later. But for now, I know that it sounds wrong to say that it's moral not to have children. It sounds like eugenics, and with good reason, because between the US and Canada alone, we ran up a considerable number of people who we just sterilized. It was Indigenous people in Canada. It was Black people in the United States, and mentally defective people in both, which usually meant poor people, and also people who had cognitive disabilities. And this is not unique to the United States. A lot of Europe obviously had this, and it's well before the Nazis. This was pretty common throughout the world in the early 20th century. And related to that is middle-class Westerners' fear of the poor generally. Well, now we're pretty bad with our own poor people. If you listen to conservatives, especially in the US, which is where I'm from, so I'm allowed to dish on them. Conservative people don't like spending on poor people, and they want them all to get jobs and to all stop having babies, because other people's babies are a drain on our society. And you don't have to know who our is when they say that. They mean other people's babies. And that is nothing compared of how people talk about population control overseas. People over there breed like flies. Their problems are due to their stupidity and laziness and unchecked physical desires. There's just too many of them. Why don't they develop their countries and have fewer babies and stop sending us refugees? And if you've noted, by the way, there's a lot more sympathy for Ukrainian refugees than there are for people coming from brown countries, as they're called, majority non-white. So overpopulation feels like a problem when it's over there, somewhere else, in what's called the global south, or in a few of the East Asian countries, such as China or South Korea, which have large populations. Now, to be as fair as I'm going to be here, both population numbers and population density are lower in the industrialized West than in most of the rest of the world, and birth rates are falling here. If you take a look, it's just kind of going down. So it's above maintenance level, but it's not as many as it used to be. But that doesn't matter as much as it sounds, or as much as many people would like to believe, because we just take so much stuff from the planet. So what I'm suggesting is not population control elsewhere or reducing population elsewhere, but reining population in the West. Because, well, just how much stuff and how many people are there? Well, I'm not going to give you all the numbers because they contradict each other, and there's like if you'll forgive the phrase, a billion of them. But there are now just shy of 8 billion people on the planet. I thought it was 7, and that was a little while ago, and now it's 8 in the world. There's 38 million people in Canada, 330 million in the US, just for local context. What's worse is it's going up pretty fast. It was about 2 billion a century ago, then 4 billion in 1975, and then it started pretty steadily adding 1 billion every 12 years. So about over the last 30, 40 years, 50 years, 50 years, it's taken 12 years to gain another billion people, and it's on track to do it again. So Canadians sometimes feel pretty good because we are not overusing the land as a whole and maintaining water, but that's largely because of our smaller population. It's because our population isn't very dense. Canada looks pretty good. The US looks a lot worse, in part because of the density of the population. So what can we look at in terms of numbers? And I'm not going to get numbers. But the simplest one is money as a proxy for consumption, like how much money do you get? And as you know, that's pretty grim. The poorer half of the world takes home less than the top 10th of the world's income earners. That's just how much you make. And in terms of actually owning things, how much they actually own and can capitalize on, it's just 2% of the world's wealth. So that's half the planet has 2% of the land that they can pass on, or other goods and the like that they can pass on. But money isn't the best measure. Another measure is ecological footprint, which is the amount of stuff, roughly put, that we use per person. And you've probably done one of those little quizzes, like, do you live in a house? Like, how many rooms are in your house? Do you drive? Do you commute? Do you eat meat? Do you have a child? Do you have how new is your refrigerator, etc.? Well, by those measures, we're doing pretty badly compared to what's called the developing world. Canada and the United States, at a per person level, are nearly tied at about 8.2 global hectares. And ask me more later. This is just basically a measure of how much land or water, a certain fertility, are needed to support you. So, and we're behind only 4 other countries in the world, one of which is Luxembourg, which is kind of weird. I think Luxembourg is like way ahead of everybody else, and then Australia's up there. So, but if you go down the list, it's then Europe and Israel, the oil exporting Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, a couple of the rich East Asian countries, and then Eastern and Southern Europe and South America, then mostly Africa, and it ends with East Timor at 0.48. So we're using roughly 16 times as much stuff or land use than East Timor. So people from poor countries demand less from the planet than richer countries do. And some of those richer countries are pretty big, like the United States. So these numbers describe our economic system. We want, and I have a new laptop here, cheaper and better functioning and cooler things for as many people as possible. And the more you can sell, the better. To that end, get people to throw things out sooner too. And I'm looking at you, IKEA, because those things do not last. You cannot move something from IKEA. You have to throw it out. And hopefully somebody will pick it up and turn it into wood. So get people to eat more. We're eating about 25% more calories than we went from 2000 to 2500 between like 1950 and now. And we just do this without thinking about it. We get things for a whim. I certainly do that. Who wears makeup has not gone and just bought a lipstick for the hell of it. We basically are turning dirt and animals and land into trash with almost no human use in the middle. And I'm not saying that this is just a desire of the West. We're not just like evil caricatures of evil, because, people everywhere pretty much have cell phones. East Timor, I'm sure they have cell phones. And I'm sure that Eritreans want that sweet home sound system. But we have a lot more of them in places like Canada or the United States or Australia or Luxembourg. We have things on every wall, in every drawer. Even even if you don't have enough to eat, you probably do have a cell phone. So we don't do this on purpose, and we know it's wasteful. And we say to ourselves, like, oh, I recycle, oh, I'm down a little bit. And it's true that you can't really get a job without a cell phone these days, and some pretty good clothes. And it's really hard to get food unless you live near a farmer's market and can afford it, to find food that is not wrapped in plastic. It's just how our world is. But no matter how fast the population grows in the global south, it will not soon catch up to the total amount of land and water used by us here. That would be less pressing if there weren't limits to what the world can stand. You know, people believe in technological solutions that are going to fix everything, but it's really hard. I mean, soil gains fertility, but slowly, and we're losing topsoil. Plastic breaks down even more slowly, obviously. You can't put the metal back in the rocks, and a lot of it is dissolved in the ocean or bound up in very stable compounds that can't be, where you can't get the metals back out. We can't restock the aquifers or other sources of fresh water. Fossil fuels, about to run out. You can redevelop complex forests and other ecological niches, but it's very difficult. I mean, you can do that, but it's very hard to do. As for non-plastic pollution, well, you know, as we didn't light a candle here because that means you're effectively sieving or putting through a sieve the ocean and air. So you can't expect technological solutions to work immediately, and certainly not in time. There's just too much world to clean up. Now, what do we do? It's pressing. There is no one answer, but we in the West, in Canada and the United States and Luxembourg and Australia, we bear an outsized responsibility. If too many people is part of the problem, and it is, because, you know, it doesn't matter how few people you have, if you're all taking a giant chunk of something, then if too many people are part of the problem, then there should be fewer future people, and we take the most. We don't need children the way that some people from other countries might. You know, there are places still where you really do need a kid or more to take care of you when you're elderly. So having no children, or maybe just one child, or adopting, that means that there's one fewer person born with industrialized Western pace. And we're hardly going to run out of people, certainly not globally. And Canada, for much the same reason, because we don't have population growth above replacement without refugees and immigrants, you know, we can keep on doing it. And the country exists for the people, not the people for the country. So people who come in do become very Canadian. And I work for a bank right now, and basically it's all non-Anglo names. And you keep hearing the very hosiery accents. You know, you just hear these, and then it's turned out it's like Rama Karishnathan, and it's like, cool, that was nice. Or somebody observing Ramadan in the middle of trying to run a project. So it's great. So I don't think Canada is going to have a problem if people just have fewer children and we turn to immigrants or to adoption. This should also be a worldwide project, but as I said, the onus lies on us. But it would be good because, for one thing, women who have fewer children tend to go to school more often. They tend to be able to support themselves and their children. They tend to be able to leave an abusive relationship. So it's good for them. It's also good for war, because a lot of war can be tied pretty closely, if you're building a model, to higher population, especially along a border. So if there's not so dense, I mean, look at the Middle East. I mean, part of that is people fighting over water. So lower population densities everywhere would be good. So while everybody should be doing this, in my child-free opinion, I think it lies with the developed world to do these things. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, we seek justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Okay, having more compassion for the people in the rest of the world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. So it may initially sound counterintuitive that going child-free is a moral obligation that supports all of those things, but I would argue that it does. Blessed be.